All right, so I finished watching the Q&A and interview that we did with Brad Stulberg earlier today. I just cut out the part with the Zoom bombers that we had in the beginning. You're not missing much there. It was just an intro, and all of the meat of it starts right after this. So hope you enjoy. So you have worked with golfers and other athletes, and I'm curious what some of the traits, dissatisfactions, things that you've noticed common to people striving to improve in their chosen pursuit.
Yeah, I think the biggest trap, and you mentioned it in opening, and the last attempt at this is this this never enough. So, right, like you start taking a pursuit really seriously and you say, hey, I just want to get my handicap to 5, and like then I'll be able to consider myself a legit golfer. And then you get your handicap to 5, and then like maybe you're content for like a day or a week, or maybe if you're lucky, a month. And then you're like, well, I want to be scratch. So then you get scratched, and then you're like, well, now I want to start winning tournaments or whatever it is. So like, I think that the biggest misconception in on the road to sustainable excellence in any arena is that like if I just attain this goal, then I'll be fulfilled and then I'll be content. And what the behavioral science research, what the ancient wisdom traditions all point toward is the same thing, which is that mindset is just not true. So you have to learn to find joy and fulfillment in the process of getting better, because no outward goal is going to bring you that joy and fulfillment. I think a really prime example is Michael Jordan. So my guess is if many of you are geeking out on the Zoom, you've probably seen the documentary The Last Dance. And Michael Jordan like is not the happiest human being. Like he's not very satisfied, which is insane because he won so much so often. And it's not to take away from anything that he did as a basketball player. He's phenomenal, but I wish for Michael Jordan that he could be like a little bit more satisfied and a little bit more content. Like that would be nice. And I think there are other models. I think that we tend to lionize the Michael Jordans of the world and make documentaries about them, but there's also like the Tim Duncan or the Giannis Antetokounmpo model of success, where you can actually have a lot of joy in the process on the way to those goals. So to me, that's the biggest trap. Just thinking that like attaining some outward performance goal is gonna somehow make you fulfilled, when in fact you have to find fulfillment on the path.
Yeah, and in your book, you contrast what you call heroic individualism with what I think you're referring to there as groundedness. So let's talk about heroic individualism. So what is that? And can you elaborate? What are some traps, again, that people fall into and when they get stuck in that mindset?
Yeah. So the easiest way to think about heroic individualism is it's a constant game of one-upsmanship against both yourself and others. So you're constantly trying to beat yourself and you're constantly trying to beat other people, where measurable achievement is the main arbiter of success. And even if you attain what you're after, like the goalpost is always 10 yards down the field. So for a golfer, everything I said up until the end might be fine. Like you might constantly want to beat yourself and you might need to be competing against others. But that second part where like the goalpost is always 10 yards from where you are, I think that's really important to recognize, because a lot of people, again, it's back to what I said, like you fall for this trap for thinking that if you just attain this or that outcome, then you'll be content. And what ends up happening is you set yourself up for failure, because if you don't attain the outcome, you'll be like super bummed out and disappointed. And if you do, you're still the same person you were the day before. Um, and I think a part of this heroic individualism is you lose joy for the game, whether that game is being a leader in a company, whether that game is writing a book, or whether that game is golf.
Yeah, so in
Yeah, I agree.
contrast to heroic individualism, you provide an alternative that you refer to as groundedness, which is the title of the book. So what is groundedness, and why might a person choose to abandon that heroic individualism in favor of groundedness?
Yeah, the metaphor that I love to use most is a mountain climber. And that's why there's a mountain on the cover of the book. So you can imagine that there's two climbers and that they both want to reach the peak of the mountain equally as bad, right? They both want to get to scratch. And the first climber is thinking about the selfies that she'll take from the peak. She's thinking about the Instagram and Twitter posts she'll make announcing the summit. She's telling herself a story that if I just reach the peak of this mountain, then I'll finally have self worth. She's telling herself a story that she can't consider herself a real mountain climber until she summits this mountain, so on and so forth. The second climber wants to reach the peak equally as bad, except she is really focused on the actual act of climbing. And she's climbing the mountain with climbing partners that she's friends with. And she's even able to enjoy the view from the side while she's doing the climbing. The second climber is what I'd call grounded. The research shows that that second climber has a significantly better probability of having a long career with lots of sustainable success. This is true metaphorically, but it's also true literally. Like research on mountain climbers show that a more grounded climber will end up having a longer career and will survive, will stay alive longer. Because what ends up happening to the first climber is they suffer from something in the climbing community known as summit syndrome. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening there is you get so fixated on reaching the peak of the mountain that you make reckless decisions that get you to the peak, but then you don't get down because your weather window has closed. Like you literally don't get down, you die on the mountain. And I think that metaphor is really powerful because perhaps the stakes aren't as high as our life, but for the own peaks that we're climbing in our respective lives, if we're just so focused on getting to the peak, then we can end up making really poor decisions for our physical, emotional, mental health and long-term sustainability in whatever we're doing. So being grounded isn't about not striving. It's not about not caring about outcomes, but it's about finding a way to be super fulfilled in the process itself.
That's great, and actually leads right into another topic I wanted to talk about. You have 6 principles of groundedness that you cover in the book. The first one of those is acceptance. And I think when a lot of people hear acceptance, they think it means giving up or not striving or something of that nature where you're not pushing, and that we need that constant push. But they probably, with that mindset, don't regard it as a path to improvement. So can you talk a little bit about those misconceptions around what acceptance means and why it's so critical to moving forward?
For sure. Yeah, people think that acceptance means like passive resignation, which is not at all certainly not how I view acceptance or write about it. I think of acceptance as just seeing clearly where you are. And if you can't see clearly where you are, then you're never going to get where you want to go. So the example here is a golfer that, perhaps like really needs to work on one element of their game, but they want to be better than they are. So they are adopting practices and playing as if they're at point B when they're still at point A. And they're constantly getting stuck and they're wondering why. And it's because, well, you haven't seen clearly that, you need to correct X, Y, Z in your swing before you can upgrade your set of clubs. And it might not be the perfect analogy, but you get the point, right? It's the weightlifter that instead of fixing their form on their back squat, just chases heavier and heavier weight and then blows out their knee and wonders why. So acceptance is really just about being honest with yourself, even if it's not where you want to be, but seeing clearly where you are, where are the holes in your respective games so that you can then work on those things. Because what often happens when we don't practice acceptance is we don't work on the thing that needs working on, and then we never make progress.
Yeah. And I feel like Lou's ears are probably perking up around some of that management of expectations. So we'll make sure to leave time for the Q&A on that. Presence is another one of those principles of groundedness that you talk about. It's something that I've written previously about in my newsletters. In golf, we have a tendency to live in the past, to dwell on the short putt that you may have just missed. worrying about the last hole or projecting forward into, what am I going to come into the clubhouse with? And in fact, I sent out a survey last year, and one of the questions I asked was, what's going through your mind when you're on track to shoot a good score? And actually, I felt like this might be worth showing because I created a word cloud of this.
I know
So
what it's say. I mean, but again, like you mentioned, like, are you a golfer? And the answer is no. But this is no different than a marathon runner that starts doing math at mile 15 of the race, or a founder that starts like projecting out if their company stays on this kind of track. And it's all don't screw up. Exactly.
As you see, yeah, right here, don't screw up, or more colorful language. Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that I really loved in your book was you gave a very simple way of beginning to practice that presence via meditation. There are also obviously other ways, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how people can start cultivating that presence, within their rounds, or and being able to apply it on the golf course.
Yeah, I mean, it's $1 million skill in any sport, I think, because anyone that is a serious athlete or creative or artist or even like business person knows that those coveted flow states, when you're just in the freaking zone, you're not thinking about what your score is going to be at the clubhouse or the putt that you just missed. You're just like one with your activity, you're in the zone. And we'd all like to spend more time in those flow states. And the biggest precondition to those flow states, the ability to be fully present. So what some sort of mindfulness meditation practice helps you do is it helps you separate your sense of self from your thoughts and your feelings. So that instead of being fused with your thoughts and your feelings, you can observe them and you can identify with a part of yourself that is different than your thoughts and your feelings. So how would this come into play in a golf round? Well, you're at the 13th or 14th hole and you're shooting a stellar round. And those thoughts and feelings about, oh my God, I need to hold on, don't mess this up, start to creep in. Instead of doing this and becoming those thoughts and feelings, you can create some distance and you can kind of soak back or sit back into that greater sense of self and just kind of say, oh, like, that's just a thought. Like, I don't have to argue with it. I don't have to take it seriously. I can just let it come and go and I can refocus on what's in front of me. And I think that's the most important skill because listen, you're on pace to shoot 68. Well, the best thing that's going to help you shoot 68 is like being fully present for every shot, not thinking about whether or not you're going to shoot 68. And it's not that we're not going to get bombarded with these thoughts and feelings. Like the goal isn't to make them go away. They're going to be there. The goal is to be able to let them kind of pass like clouds in the sky instead of latch onto them. And that's what any sort of mindfulness practice really helps you do. Because when you sit down to meditate, like anyone that's ever tried to meditate for 10 minutes realizes just the freaking torrent of thoughts and feelings that your brain throws at you. And the more that you just sit there, the more that you start to cultivate this sense of awareness that is separate from that torrent. And it's that sense of awareness that ultimately helps you redirect your attention to the ball, to the book that you're reading, whatever it is that you're doing that you want to be present for.
Yeah. I've found it super helpful, and it's not something that I can just pull out on the course if I'm not actually practicing my own meditation. I find that it's much easier to have those thoughts begin to wander as I set up over a ball.
Yeah, I think it's a muscle, and I think meditation is one of these things where, like, so many fads pop up in performance sport, and I don't think meditation is one. I would argue that like the deeper and richer you go, like the ultimate goal of meditation isn't to like be a better golfer; it's to be like a more compassionate person. And a nice byproduct of it is it's going to probably make you a much better golfer. And again, it's because it's a muscle. Like if you've never tapped into that feeling of being separate from a thought or like separate from a feeling, then everything I'm saying just sounds conceptual or woo woo. But if you sit down for 10 minutes and like, oh, I'm thinking, and you do that for 3 weeks, eventually, like you really start to realize that there's a part of you that is separate from your thoughts and feelings. And if you're practicing strengthening that muscle, then when you're out on the course, you can tap into that part of yourself during a round of golf or anything in life.
And so one last kind of principle that I wanted to dig into before we turn it over to some Q&A that may strike some as a bit counterintuitive is be patient and you'll get there faster. And this can be one that's difficult for people to accept. The way a lot of us seem to be wired pushes us to kind of burn the candle at both ends and expect the results to follow suit. And that can obviously lead to a lot of frustration, burnout. Can you talk a little bit about some of those counterintuitive aspects and how to leverage this advice for things like goal planning, managing expectations, things like that? And why is it in general that being patient allows you to get there faster?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll start with the kind of the common trap is that we want to achieve our goal much faster than we have a legitimate chance at achieving it. So we set a false expectation, and then that leads to reckless decision making, to burnout, to frustration, all those negative things that you mentioned. So like mastery is actually pretty freaking simple the way that I like to think of it. I was just having this conversation with another coach earlier today. For most things in life, and I'm no expert in golf, so you can tell me if this is accurate or not. My guess is it is. 95% of the programs and fads out there that we're exposed to on the internet are just garbage. But 5% are probably really good. And those 5% can be quite different. Like there's different roads to Rome. And if you just pick one of those plans and approaches that's not reckless and you stick with it for 8 to 10 years, you'll get really freaking good. The challenge is sticking with it for 8 to 10 years and not falling for the, improve your golf game in 40 days using this new fancy technique bullshit, whatever it is, right? It's really challenging to stay patient and to stay disciplined and to stay on the course. But if you talk to anyone that's actually made it, there's no such thing as an overnight breakthrough. It just doesn't exist. And what's publicized is the breakthrough, but what you don't see are the years of work that are behind it where there was little to no observable progress made. I think the most important part of this is just normalizing it and like giving you all words for this. Observable progress trails effort. It's the most important thing to remember is anyone on any kind of path of mastery. Now, the counter and the question that I sometimes get is, well, how do I know if the program's not working? Like if I'm not getting better, it could just be because my coach sucks. And there's some truth to that, but particularly in sports, again, if you've picked a plan that's not reckless, the more common trap isn't hanging on too long, it's quitting too soon. And then you're serial switchers. So 1 year, you're working on your swing this way, and then you didn't get as good as you think. So then you switch to a new swing coach. And then you get a new club and you're all trying to fix this problem when what you needed to do is just pick one of these things and stick to it for a longer period of time.
That doesn't sound familiar at all, I don't think, to any of us in this room. It's not working. Let me try to find something else.
I have a friend that coaches a lot of world-class strength athletes. And even like at that level, he jokes around and he says but there's some truth. Like the most dangerous thing is an internet forum. You go there and you see all these tips and you're like, oh, maybe that would work for me. And patience is about trusting your own process and trusting your skill development path that you've committed to. And again, once you weed out the 95% of the grift and you have confidence in your path, then it's just about sticking with it.
I believe Lou just released a podcast episode that covers very similar topics. This is great. I don't want to hog up all the time with my questions. I want to turn it over now to the people in here. Yeah, well, what would you like to ask Brad? Well, we've got him. I've got one from online that was somebody that wanted to make it, couldn't make it. 0 putts given on Twitter. So the question was, my game is good. What's that?
That's a good Twitter. 0 putts.
My game is good enough to be scoring in the 70s, but then I look at the score and I immediately start fantasizing that this is the round. But at the first sign of trouble, I crumble like an old crusty cookie. How do I break through this mental barrier and just continue to play solid throughout the whole round?
Whew. That gets back to the survey that you put out, right? I think this person's likely just getting in their own way by going from a place of like playing to win versus playing not to lose and then choking. It sounds like the playing not to lose being like, oh, this could be the round. And I would do everything possible to switch to, instead of this could be the round. And it's a subtle mindset shift to being really curious. Like, like, I wonder if I can keep playing this well. Like, I wonder how this round's going to unfold. That's one approach that really works, because curiosity is really open, and it's the opposite of the kind of pressure to hit a goal, which is narrowing. And then the other thing that can really help in these situations is just to tell yourself it's not going to be the round. To be like, nope, like I'm going to blow it. That's your self-talk. This is so counterintuitive, because once you've already blown it, then like you release that pressure. So you're at hole 14, and instead of arguing with, oh, this could be the round, or like, what do I need to do to make it the round? Just tell yourself like, nope, the next 6 holes are going to go terribly, so I might as well have fun. And then what you do is it's this like little trick. You don't give your brain a chance to like argue. Your brain like literally is like, what the fuck are you talking about? And just be like, yep, like the rest of this round's going to suck, but I'm just going to focus on this shot. You hit that shot well. Oh, well, the next shot's going to suck. Just focus on the next shot. And it's just a very counterintuitive way of like removing some of that self-imposed pressure, because it never goes well. Once you start having the thoughts, this could be the round, people tend to start forcing things. So the 2 ways out of it are the counterintuitive way of just telling yourself, nope, it's not going to be the round, I'm going to mess up, because it kind of short circuits all that debate and pressure, or to try to get really curious instead of like so pressure driven to achieve a goal.
And in both cases, it's driving back towards, okay, I'm allowing these thoughts to exist. I'm not trying to fight them.
Yep.
And then I'm going to remove or return myself to the present moment and the task that I'm trying to accomplish, which is
right. Because you know, let's say that those thoughts start creeping in around hole 13 or 14. Well, you weren't thinking them on the first 13 holes, which is what put you in a position to maybe have this be the round. Some people really don't like the whole like going hard in the opposite direction of like, no, the next shot's going to suck. So another like good little self-talk clue is like, you could just say maybe, but maybe not. Like maybe not, which is also very accurate and honest. No one knows if it's going to be the round. But these are all just ways to like not give that thought rent-free space in your brain, to just kind of like short circuit it.
That's great.
Instead of, oh, this could be the round, which now that thought is like swirling and really getting enlarged.
Yeah. Jay, I think you had a question.
Yeah, Brad, just how do you, so I'm a scientist, and I'm always sort of tinkering with my own game as a goal to get better, right? Because I feel like it's nice to have a goal to strive for. How do you balance the mastery mindset with avoiding falling into the trap of getting enamored with meeting a goal? You know, so if my goal is to try to improve, you know, not because I want to be a PGA professional, but just because I feel like I can get better, try to be the best version of myself as a golfer, as a person. So that mastery mindset requires adherence to the process over time. But how do you avoid the pitfalls of, you know, when I meet a goal, let's say, you want to set another goal and set the bar a little higher, but how do you try to avoid falling into the pitfalls you discussed earlier?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the driving force behind what led me to write the book. So it's a very common conundrum. I think that like the immediate thing that comes to mind is you kind of answered the question yourself in the way you asked it, where you said like, I want to like be a better golfer and a better person. And you didn't say I want to shoot 68 or I want to shoot 67. You said I want to be a better golfer and a better person. And those have no end. Like there is no quantifiable way. Now going from 74 to 72 to 68, those are like really nice milestones. But when you're 85, you're probably not going to shoot as well as you do now, but you might consider yourself a better golfer because you might show up with more intention. You might find more joy. You might be wiser about how you approach the sport. So I think like centering these very specific outcome goals, which do matter, but then centering them within like a circle of broader goals that are more mastery focused, that have no end. I ultimately think that's it. And ultimately, like, you know, like you said, you're not going to be on the PGA Tour. So ideally, you're getting some of these like side benefits from golf, which is like you're becoming more patient. You're getting better at self-talk with yourself. You're getting better at boredom and staying focused through periods of boredom. And these things are just life skills.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I used to get really hard on myself, go home, shoot a bad round and dwell on it for 3 days. And then the last couple of years, I've really tried to just focus on being grateful. I'm on the golf course and hitting a good shot and taking joy in that. And it's made me much happier with my golf, and my golf is better. And I'm of course happier when I come home, which makes my wife happy. So I think what you touch on, those have really helped me quite a bit.
Yeah. And you know, it's true even for elite athletes, because obsessing over a workout that didn't go well, literally that hurts recovery. Like there's more cortisol in your bloodstream.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is about like being able to say, hey, this pursuit is making me a better, kinder, more patient, wiser, whatever person. And I get a lot of joy out of it. And when it's over, and I'm going to do my best to transition to other elements of my identity. It doesn't mean that when you're in it, you're not ruthless and playing to win. But then when it's over, you switch to these other parts of your identity. And I think a sign of maturity in any pursuit is you can make that switch faster. So instead of loathing the bad round for 3 days, you loathe it for 3 hours.
Yep. All right, cool. Thanks, Brad.
Great. Other questions? Jason, what do you see with your golfers? So for anybody that doesn't know, Jason's a teaching professional. What are some of the common mental struggles that you see them going through?
Yeah, for sure. You were chatting about like what was it, like 45-day fix or whatever? No, man, it's like golf's like it's like the 5-minute. You need to like get better in golf in 5 minutes. 45 days is too long for most golfers, especially if you're in the winter months where you only play for like 6 months. So, what you were talking about definitely is awesome and 100% true. And where I would say I see the most struggle for golfers, especially ones that are coming to get better and are looking to take lessons, is one, they go too fast. And you were talking about that, right? It's mastering a skill. And I always try to give my golfers sort of different ways of thinking about how they're learning. So for instance, when we talk about, how you learn to walk or how you learn to play any other sport, for instance, hockey, big Canadian guy, right? You didn't get on the ice and you didn't just take slap shots, right? Because you didn't know how to skate. Okay. You first need to learn how to balance. Okay. And then you need to learn how to push, and then so on and so forth. And I see a lot of people that get very frustrated because they can't go from 100% their swing to the 100% swing that they want. And they get lost in translation of like making really, really slow swings and ingraining those patterns and being patient from there to, where we want to get them. What would you say for that person that's getting frustrated along that route?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things. The first is the more that you can set appropriate expectations and really have those sink in, the better. is Hutch said at the beginning of this, like happiness equals reality minus expectations. So if your expectations are that you're going to get better in 2 months and you as the pro are like, nah, it's going to be 2 years, that's a huge mismatch. People are going to be dissatisfied. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I think the more that we can talk to athletes about identifying not as like the perfect swing, but as the craftsperson who's actually doing the work of getting better, the more resilient they'll be on that longer path. I think people too quickly want to identify with the perfect swing and not want to identify with like the grit and the craft work of doing the work. And you see this, I mean, you see this in some of the best athletes in other sports, where those that really fall in love with the process are the ones that have the best outcomes. But it's not because they're obsessed with those outcomes. It's because like they've fallen in love with the process. And then as a teaching pro, to be kind to yourself and realize that you're competing against the cover of every new golf magazine that does have those 5-minute tricks. And that of course people are going to want to get better faster. That's human nature. So I think the expectation setting is really good. And you'll probably lose some prospective clients because of that. But then the clients that stick around are going to be in there for the long haul.
Awesome. Thank you.
Azim.
Thanks for putting this on, Michael, and thanks for giving us your time, Brad. I think one of the questions I have, and sorry, I had to step away for work for a few minutes, so you may have answered something like this, but along those lines, I'm a physician. To get where I am right now, it took me years and years of residency. It wasn't automatic. All this stuff you guys are talking about, I find I play golf because it relates more to the rest of my life, and it gives me those skills for the rest of my life. But then I want that quick fix. I'm having trouble squaring the club face right now. I'm having trouble with my takeaway. And okay, I did drills for 10 minutes, and now I want to do something new. And I listened to Lou's podcast, and he was talking about this drill he does really well. And I was like, oh, I got to reach out to Lou to find out what that drill is. Oh, I got to reach out to this. I want that quick fix. So I've done it in the rest of my life. And I'm still doing it because I'm still, not at, there's still a long way of learning and practice. That's why it's called practice in medicine. But how do I bring that over to something like golf or my next pursuit or whatever it is? Because I think I do love the process. I'm into it, but I also get so motivated by those results. And it's progress is the best motivator. So how do I balance that and bring what I've done elsewhere into this too?
How'd you do it in medicine?
Why I couldn't do it here, I think it just took time, and you can't know. There's so much to know. There's so much to do, and I recognize the same thing with golf. Like I think it might have, I don't know which podcast, maybe it was Lou's again, where they were talking about Tiger Woods took 2 years to make a swing change, right? So I know that it's not instant. But when I'm there and I'm like, oh, I got this, and then I'm flipping the wrists at impact again, I'm like, oh, I just get so frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that's totally normal. Like I said, like everyone wants to get better faster. I think it kind of comes back to presence, right? Just giving yourself permission to have those thoughts and feelings and being impatient. And then just kind of coming back to the work itself, which is like, all right, like back to what I'm actually focused on in this given session. I think, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it is helpful to have like micro victories along the way, because as you said, progress is a really good motivator. So if there's a way to set yourself up for some small wins that keep you going, that's great. And then I think the role of a good coach or a good community is to support you during long stretches where you don't have those micro wins. And to say like, nope, like stick with this. Or to say, all right, you've been sticking with this for long enough and we're not seeing any improvement, time to make a tweak.
Thanks.
Jason, going back to you and relating it to that question, at what point, if you're not seeing progress, say with a student, or they're suffering that frustration, do you say we're going to go a different tact here?
Well, It always sort of depends on how often the person's practicing. Even like you said before, meditation is a muscle. Same thing with golf, right? The more that you practice, I have some students that practice daily or twice a day, and then I got guys that practice once a week. Now, the guy that practices once a week, it may be 4 weeks, it may be a year for the amount that he's practicing. If a guy's doing it, however, every day, and let's say in 3 weeks he hasn't seen any improvement, okay, then obviously something's not right. Now, it may be the drill, or it may be the wording that I've given him, right? And sometimes saying the same thing but in a different format or a different version clicks with that guy, and that's where we would look to change. It might be the exact same thing we're looking to change. It's just how we're going to go about tackling it.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think
sorry. Go ahead, Brad. Yeah, if you've got a response to that, great.
Well, this is where having different cues that you can focus on, I think, can be really helpful at a physical pursuit like golf. So I don't know what the cues are, but generally there are multiple cues that can get someone in the right position. And maybe you start with like one cue, feel the weight in your heel. And that doesn't work. Well, then maybe the other cue is like tight back, squeeze your lats in. So, I come from more of a strength sport. So like these are specific to strength, but presumably there are similar cues that in golf. And then that also keeps it fresh for you as the learner to say, all right, like this cue is not working. Like can I have a menu of cues to focus on while I try to learn this new skill?
Yes, if I can chime back in there. So absolutely 100%. So what I'll always ask for, and people, so I teach a lot online, if people don't know, and they're like, how do you do that? Whenever I send my breakdown back to that student, I ask them, I don't demand it, but I ask them for them to videotape themselves doing the drill. And then I want to know, what that drill feels like. So for instance, if I'm got him to do X, right, I'm going to show them the drill. Okay. And I'm going to talk about a feel that may give them that. But again, feels are subjective from player to player, just like you said, right? But here's the drill. Here's what I want it to look like. They're going to then video with the tape themselves, get that good feedback, and then send that feedback to me. And then they might say, okay, while I'm doing this drill, I actually feel this in my left shoulder. And I'm like, perfect. If that's the feel that translates you into that move, that gets us into the good position that allows you X to get into a better spot. Fantastic. Keep doing that. I love it. And let me know in 2 weeks how it feels and how the ball flight is.
Yeah. Scott, you had a question.
Yeah, Hutch, I appreciate you putting this on today. I mean, this definitely applies to me as far as, I put a lot of time and effort into golf. And so you want to see that instant gratification. And there's times when I'm having my best score, 5 holes left, and, you start getting nervous and your game goes to hell. So definitely followed a lot of you guys and just, read a lot of books and as far as being in the moment and things like that. But curious, just as we've talked through these things, as far as my son started playing about 5 years ago. And that's really when I started playing. And, once I got the fix, then, I couldn't turn back. But for him, he's a good golfer. He enjoys it. But there's times when, he's playing and he'll have, 2 or 3 shots in a row where they go bad. And then at that point, like he falls apart, like to a point where sometimes he like can't even physically hit the ball. Like he'll whiff and stuff like that, just like really gets into his head. So I was just curious as far as, for anyone in the group, just any recommendations you'd have as far as just coaching somebody. And I think a lot of it comes down to expectations, now that he's carrying a handicap and he's playing in some tournaments and things like that, that he's always thinking that, you put the time in, your game's going to get better. And we all know with golf, it like from one day to the next or 1 month to the next, it isn't. It's more like the stock market where it kind of ticks up, in the long run, it's going up, but there's going to be a lot of bad days. Your handicap's not going to just keep getting lower from one round to the next. So anyway, I just wanted to know if you had any advice as far as just how to keep it being encouraging and keep his head in the game. And so he doesn't have a bad day and then not want to play for a month or two, just so he doesn't have that feeling of disappointment again.
How old is he?
He's 13.
Yeah, so he's young. I have a couple of thoughts. The first is the managing of expectations, I think, is really important. And to your point, like helping him realize that it's not linear progress day to day. When you zoom out over a decade, the line is up and to the right, but day to day, it's up and down and up and down. And that the goal is just to become a better average. And some language that I found helpful is that how you perform on your bad days is actually more important than how you perform on your great ones. Because when everything's clicking, that's easy. But when you do hit crappy shots, like staying in there and salvaging the situation, that's a lot harder. And it kind of shifts the mindset from those bad streaks from like disaster to actually like challenges or opportunities. And the challenge is like, shit, I've hit 4 bad shots. Like, how do I keep my head in this? What I do, even though this round is quote unquote blown, how badly it's blown, that's going to have a bigger long-term impact on my development than the great days. I think he's probably a little young for this at 13, but it's something to consider, especially as he gets older, is this idea of negative visualization in practice. So when you're practicing, like visualize that everything's going to crap. So visualize that you've just hit 3 bad shots. Visualize that you want to walk off the court. Like really close your eyes and take a couple minutes to try to put yourself in the situation psychologically where everything's gone to hell in a handbag. And then in practice, step up to the ball and go to the driving range and hit shots when you're in that mindset. Because that ultimately, like all that mindset is, it's a source of anxiety. And like, what do we do when we feel anxious? We try to avoid the thing. And how do you get over anxiety? Like you expose yourself to the fear. So if the fear is like, I'm playing really crappy, then the more exposure you have to hitting shots when you're in that mindset, the less scary it's going to be when it happens out during a tournament. I worked with a golfer. I've only worked with 2 golfers, both collegiate kids. And one was really struggling. I mean, they both were, right? I'm not helping them with their swing. They come to me for the mental side of the game. And they were struggling with choking. And when the most effective thing for both was really like this, but again, they were collegiate, but was this negative visualization. So they were trying to get really good at taking deep breaths and calming themselves down and all that. And I'm like, what if we just did the exact opposite? What if when you practice, you just put yourself in terrible, shitty, stressful situations and just learn how to hit the ball, even when your mind is racing with a million negative thoughts. And that helped both of them because then when that happened, they didn't freak out. They're like, oh, I've practiced how to hit the ball when my mind is telling me I suck.
Yeah,
that's good. I've had a lot of those conversations with them, and I've never put them in a bat. I think that's a good idea to put while you're practicing. Try to have that mindset, and then that way, when you're in the moment, maybe you can get out of it. Are there any techniques or anything like when he is like, let's say on the course and just like is having that malfunction in his brain as far as hitting the ball, or somebody has the shanks that's older or whatever, is there something that you would recommend to get somebody out of that moment, right when they are having a difficult time?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can only speak from generalities because I'm not an expert on golf, but the most important thing is like trying to get them out of that. So what happens with the yips in baseball or like the twisties in gymnastics, and I'm assuming it's similar to like what you just called the shanks, I've never heard of that in golf, is there's like a perception action breakdown in the brain. And that tends to happen when people are like in really high stress situations. So the research on this generally comes out of soldiers in war. And you can go from like having a great shot with a gun or being able to follow orders to being like you've never done the thing before. And that just happens when the stress level is super high. So I think the most important thing is trying to find ways to turn the stress dial down so that like the prefrontal cortex part of your brain is communicating with the limbic system as it ought to be. And then if it's more like chronic and persistent, and again, this is all like pretty cutting edge sports science because some people have the yips in baseball and like they can never pitch again. Intentionally trying to mess up. So like really like purposely like trying to throw the ball way out there, because then you feel what that's like. And then that kind of just helps like the mind body connection get back, and then it gives you a chance of remembering what it's like to actually throw well.
Interesting.
Great. I want to be mindful of your time, Brad. Any last questions that we want to go through? Comments?
I appreciate you putting this together. Thanks so much for taking an interest in the book. Means a lot to me. It's like I said to you privately, but I just love when I see the concepts I write about applied in different ways. And for those that are attending, thanks for your time. If you haven't read or listened to the book, I hope this encouraged you to pick it up, because it's not a golf book on its face, but maybe it's a golf book in disguise.
Yeah, it really is. I'll second that. I listened to it on audiobook first, and then have been going through and highlighting way too much, because so much of it is applicable to both golf and my career and things that I'm trying to improve. So I really just highly recommend it to everybody here if you're interested. And I think, you know, this group is clearly a lot of people with you know, their own backgrounds and their own expertise that they bring to the equation, and to kind of synthesize that with Brad's outlook on this and this idea of groundedness and how you can bring it to your game, I think is really powerful. So Brad, thank you so much again for joining, for everybody else for taking time out of your day as well, for putting up with the interruption at the beginning. Glad that we got to get things back on track there. And hopefully we can do a few more of these. It'd be a lot of fun. I enjoy having you know, a group like this to intelligently discuss some of these issues and struggles that are pretty common to all golfers. So I'll leave it at that. I'll also send out a recording and apology to anybody that I blocked from coming into the room after that. But Brad, thanks again. Thank you to everybody here. Please shoot me any follow-up questions, things like that. Happy to pass along. And yeah, hope you all have a fantastic weekend, are able to get out on the course and play well, or especially have fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Talk later. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Brad, thanks, Hutch.
Thanks.
Yep. Bye, guys. Have a good
Bye.
weekend.